So elections are really just a snapshot of events. They're not the be all and end all, but they are a very important snapshot. It's a time where political issues are discussed in a lot of detail. It's where people who are camp activists get out and campaign and meet ordinary working class people on the doorstep. So elections are a really important thing to analyse and understand and see what they tell us about how the movement is developing. For those of us who are socialists, who want to see a change in society, elections are a key step along that road. So for that reason, we want to discuss the elections that took place last week. Now, so there were council elections in England, Wales and Scotland, and then on top of that, in Northern Ireland, they had assembly elections. So we've got Harry, who can speak about Northern Ireland as part of the introduction. We've got Ray Goodspeed, who's going to speak about England, and I'm going to chuck in a few things about Scotland, where I live, and then Wales, where I don't live, but I will talk about that just so that we've got the complete picture, because the position in each part of the UK is quite different. So although there are some general trends, it's quite clear that there are very different trends in each of these countries.
First of all, I think it's important, that we don't get too sniffy about things. I mean, start with the good news. I think 490 odd Tories councillors are no longer councillors, and that's a cause for celebration. There's no question about it. 490 Tories that were councillors on Thursday, on Friday they weren't, and that's good. I mean, that they're representatives locally of one of the most vicious governments, one of the most right-wing, vicious, authoritarian governments, even though it pretends it isn't any of those things. And any Tory out is a good idea. And I have to say, anybody who's particularly in London, but people all over the country, if you were up that night on Thursday night and the Wandsworth and Westminster results came through, I was whooping on my sofa, because the Wandsworth and Westminster and Barnet, all three of those councils are truly dreadful Tory councils. Wandsworth was Thatcher's favourite council. Westminster was famous for gerrymandering boundaries and selling council estates in marginal wards to try and ensure that they kept them Tory. Barnet is famous as an easy council. It's like they've outsourced almost everything to private companies, and have had a completely brutal policy towards their own workforce. And it's very interesting. I put something on Facebook the other day. The Unison secretary in Barnet has already said, right, I want to knock on the door of the new Labour leader and let's see how different will you be from the Tories. Now, it might not be that different, but the idea that there's a Labour council there has given a whole group of people much more hope that however bad it is, it will be an improvement on the Tories. And obviously it depends on how strong the workers in Barnet are as to how far they can push it. Cumberland, we know that there's so many people here from Cumberland, the new Workers' Republic of Cumberland. That's good, and that's a great thing to see. And there's been a couple of others. There were sort of a few other councils where we just got a couple of seats. Labour got a couple of seats, and it nudged us into control, like in Southampton, Kirklees, Rossendale, and on the south coast, Worthing, of all places, which is 10 years ago had no Labour councillors, now has a Labour council. All of that, workers are going to be happy with. Every single worker even people who didn't vote Labour because of this or that protest, secretly they were whooping when Labour took those councils in Wandsworth and Westminster, and I don't believe anybody who says they weren't. But outside London, generally, it's appalling. I mean, Sir John Curtis, from the BBC, the psephologist, Starmer has done the same or less than Corbyn, or worse than Corbyn in 2018. The votes actually outside London actually went down. We've lost a lot of seats, apart from Cumberland, of course. We lost a lot of seats. We lost seats in ones and twos all over the North and the Midlands, in the West Midlands area, in Newcastle, South Shields, Sunderland. We lost 2 seats even in Hastings in the south, and we lost control of Hull to the Liberals. So the idea somehow, Starmer trolloping around saying, "Oh well, look." What a great turning point this is. It's a vindication of my leadership strategy. Just is completely ridiculous. And I think even in places like Tameside in Manchester, we even lost seats to the Tories themselves. And I think, that needs to be remembered. And the result of all this, I think, is that Johnson is safe. this could have been a great example of like putting pressure on Johnson to force him out, put the Tory party into crisis. But I honestly don't think it. Starmer, not only is Johnson not in threat now, immediate threat because of the elections, but he's actually put himself under damage by the inept way he's played this whole kind of Partygate issue. I won't touch on that now because it's just too ridiculous to talk about. But yeah, so he's hoisted with his own petard now. He might actually find himself having to retire instead of Johnson, which is only somebody of the ineptitude of Keith Starmer could actually put himself in a corner like that. And you had all these shadow cabinet members going around spinning that 2018 was simultaneously a high point that you can't expect any big gains to improve upon. But in 2018, the very self-same people were saying that it was a missed opportunity for Corbyn and the reason why he should resign. So you do worse than Corbyn 4 years later, and you can't improve on a high point. But the same high point 4 years ago was described by the same people, Wes Streeting and all his friends, as a disappointing night. We didn't make the gains we should have made, and blah, 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 blah. Complete hypocrisy as usual. And somebody who's put in the chat about London is correct, of course. It's not all good in London at all. For the three councils that were won, I described, Croydon, Harrow and Tower Hamlets were lost. It's an interesting thing to note that in Tower Hamlets, Labour lost more seats in Tower Hamlets than they gained in the whole of England. Aspire, Lutfur Rahman's left party that's based mainly on the Bengali community in East London, a descendant party really of respect. They took 24 seats, I think, and that's 2 more than Labour gained in the whole of England. In Enfield, although we didn't lose the council, we lost 8 seats in Enfield. We lost Croydon, we lost Harrow. You know, these are disastrous. So even in London, we won 3 councils and lost 3 councils. So, you know, it's not the great victory that they pretend. In Barnet, of course, you know, Keir Starmer, of course, would hightail his way to Barnet because he wanted really to make the point about, look what I've done about anti-Semitism. Now we've won Barnet. It proves that I'm clearing the party of anti-Semites. And of course, it's true that about 15% of the population in Barnet is Jewish. It's one of the highest concentration of Jewish people of any local authority area in the country, I think, or the second highest. And of course, that had, you know, all the panic whipped up by the Tory press and the Tory Jewish press as well, and the Labour right wing did have an effect to some degree on the Jewish votes in Barnet. But it's just as much people were, you know, Labour's been gradually getting seats there, like chipping away at that council. And as many people would have voted for the Tories to stop voted for the Labour to stop the Tories outsourcing and the brutal way they treat their own staff as anything else. But we need to be absolutely clear, I think, as socialists in the Labour Party, that we welcome the Tory losses and we welcome the Tory gains. And I think protest voting almost certainly happened. I think there's been a boost for the Green Party, and a lot of those people will be Labour supporters and, frankly, Labour members. I can't be the only person on this video chat to have spoken to Labour Party members who secretly confessed to not voting Labour this time. And I think it's important to say that it's very tempting to vote in a protest vote, maybe for the Greens or even for some sort of tiny little self-proclaimed revolutionary sect. It's possible to vote for those just to sort of to give Starmer a bloody nose and to make you feel good about yourself. I saw Ash Sarkar this morning saying, I didn't vote Labour for the first time in 7 years. I voted for the Greens because I couldn't bring myself. Well, that's just a moral gesture, isn't it, really? It's to make yourself feel better and sleep at night. When you're giving advice to the class, when you're trying to sell your politics to the mass of working class people, you know, most workers think it's a really good thing to get rid of the Tories and to get the Labour Party in. And if you say it isn't, if you say they're all the same, even workers who kind of think there's not much difference, they still want Labour in power as opposed to the Tories, and they don't see it as a kind of it's all the same. So and of course those people who vote for small revolutionary sects or the Green Party in safe Labour seats wouldn't dream of doing so, or you'd hope they wouldn't do so in a very marginal seat. So they recognise that if it came to it, you'd have to vote Labour, and the Labour's always better than the Tories. It's a gesture, but most workers actually are desperate for change. Now, I'm not suggesting that most workers think that Starmer's going to save their life and transform society. They most certainly don't expect that. They expect very little from Starmer. Our job, I think, is to get the reformists, or the reformists without reforms, is what we've got now, the kind of people who used to be reformists 30 or 40 years ago are now just kind of people promising next to nothing and getting in, just hoping that the Tories set themselves on fire enough so that Labour can get in by default almost. And I think our job is to call their bluff. I think the need is to get the reformists in power, because a lot of reformists in local government say, oh, well, we would do all these wonderful radical things, but the government is stopping us. We haven't got the money. If only we had a Labour government in, if only this, if only that. Of course, we're really socialist, but we just can't do it. We have to be realistic. Well, then get a Labour government in, get a Labour council in and say, right, do it then. Transform the lives of working people, or even implement some sort of minimal reform. And of course, many of them won't do that. And once they're in, we need to pressure them, just like I said with the Barnett Unison secretary. He's, within a day of the result, he was knocking on the door of the Labour leader saying, right, we want to talk to you about outsourcing, wage increases, workers' rights. We want to reverse all these attacks on workers in Borough of Barnet that we've had over the last few years. And I think that there was a layer clearly of more advanced workers in a way, advanced workers or impatient workers almost edging towards the kind of ultra-left position, almost kind of reformist ultra-left position, where because they have seen through Starmer's lies, they think that the entire mass of working class people have seen through Starmer's lies. But of course they haven't. Our job is to put them in power and then hold their feet to the fire. Our job is to strip them from any excuse, put them in, and then demonstrate to people, working people who vote for them still in their thousands and millions, demonstrate to those people that their ideas are useless, that the only way to actually solve the problems facing working people is socialism, to build a socialist society, for the working class people to take power into their own hands and to take control of the economy and to build a society which is not based on profit, which is not based on greed, which is based on people's needs. I think it's still entirely possible that Starmer, assuming he doesn't actually shoot his own feet off in this ridiculous Durham episode, it's still possible that Starmer could just win or become the biggest party just because the Tories are very good at setting themselves on fire. But our job is, if he did that, is to expose his timidity, expose the kind of the betrayals that are inevitable coming from that. And I think on that basis to build support for socialist society. And I'll leave it there.
The situation in Scotland saw a similar position to the rest of the UK, where the Tories lost lots of seats. They lost 63 seats in Scotland, and they dropped from second position to third, and Labour moved back up to second, winning 20 seats. The SNP pretty much maintained their dominant position with a slight increase of 22 seats. So that leaves the SNP on top with 34.1%, Labour second on 21.8%, and the Tories third on 19.7%. From a Labour perspective, I think there's a sign. It's not that scientific, it's just my own feeling, but that sort of class issues are starting to come back a bit. And so we saw Labour win Western Bartonshire Council. And I think, Ray talked there about how Starmer hightailed to Barnet to celebrate it there. He also hightailed it to Western Bartonshire. I think he also went to Carlisle, didn't he? He's lucky that he didn't win too many councils, otherwise he would have had to travel a lot further than he did. But so that was a success. But even in Glasgow, where I live, Labour came close to overtaking the Tories. So in the council in Glasgow, it ended up with the Scottish National Party 37 and Labour 36. So it was more or less the same as before, but Labour won some seats in Shettleston in the east. But the Scottish, you've always got the independence question that looms over us in Scotland, but also people are voting on local issues. This was a council election. And in Glasgow, where I am, the council has cut services. They've not reopened libraries, etc., after the pandemic, and big campaigns were waged about that. The government in Holyrood in Edinburgh had to bail them out by giving money to reopen these libraries because the council refused to, and it was working against the SNP. They've cut things like there's a grass maintenance grant, a garden maintenance grant that 13,000 people in Glasgow, older people, vulnerable people, had, and the SNP council cut that. So these sort of things came to the fore, and the council leader in Glasgow, called Susan Aitken of the SNP, in her ward in Langside in the south of Glasgow, she actually got beat on the first vote, the first preference vote. The Greens zoomed up from about 1,000 to 3,000 to overtake her. And I think that's a sort of an indication of how people are fed up with the SNP council not doing much. In my own ward, the Tory vote dropped by 36%. The SNP vote went up just 2%, but the Labour vote went up by 43%. And the Labour candidate moved from third position last time to first this time. And the Greens got in, and we got rid of the Tory councillor. So as I say, that we've got these issues, the local and the independence things. And as I say, I tentatively, and this is not entirely scientific, but I have a feel that the class issues are starting to come back and starting to work against, because the only way you can fight the danger of nationalism is to be fighting for workers' unity and socialism. And that's what I feel. But I get a sense that the areas, if you look at a map in Glasgow of where the Labour was the first vote on the first preference, it was in the more working class areas on the outside of Glasgow, the southwest and the northeast. And the SNP vote was more in the central parts where you find the more middle class parts of the population. Now, as I say, I've not done a scientific study of this, but I did a quick check against a map of the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, and it does have a certain correlation with that. So I think I might be on the right track there. So the question of the reason why independence is always there is that, like, this is about 15 years now where the SNP has been the majority party in Scotland. And during that time, there have been about 10 different elections of local, national, Westminster. When I say national, the two types of national, the Scottish government elections and then the Westminster elections. But if you think there's another party, the Alba Party, former SNP leader Alex Salmond, they stood and they called for immediate action on independence. That was one of their demands. They'd almost got an extra parliamentary approach to that question. And they stood 111 candidates, all of whom failed to get elected. So they were absolutely destroyed. Don't think they got more than 5% anywhere. And this party has a terrible position on trans rights. I think they've argued that the changes to the Gender Recognition Act that have been going through constitute a threat to women. And that is a very false idea that's been very well refuted by Ray Goodspeed in his interview that we published recently on the YouTube channel, which I would encourage everyone to watch. Again, in the light of Labour failing to get massive gains, particularly poor in England, you would have thought the groups on the left might have made some headway, the split off groups. But in Scotland, we've had them active for over 30 years, but they still have made no inroads. So we saw people called the TUSC, Trade Union and Socialist Coalition, or the Scottish Socialist Party. Wherever they stood, they generally got less than 100, but now and again they got maybe up to 150 votes in areas where 7,000 or 8,000 were on offer. So this just shows that is not a serious alternative. Working people still look to the Labour Party, and that's why we should continue to be active there. So to me, I have a sense that what's happened in this election is it's confirmed the trends we were seeing, and nothing's massively changed, but I think things will change significantly in the future. We have to be aware, we understand dialectics, which means things change in different ways. And one of the aspects of dialectics is quantity leading into quality. And what that means is the build-up of the problems that are going to be heaped on working class people with the cost of living crisis, etc., will break out. And that will reflect itself in trade union struggle and in the political struggle. So these elections, I think, on the surface appear just to be general trends, but I think that there's a lot more to come in the near future. On Wales, very quickly on Wales, as I say, I'm not an expert, but Wales got a much bigger increase in Labour seats than England. In fact, they got 3 times as many gains in Wales as the whole of England. They got 66 extra seats compared to 22 in England. There was one unfortunate loss of a working class area in Neath and Port Talbot, but generally Labour did okay. And Drakeford portrays himself as a more radical than Starmer, and that plays, a certain benefit to him. And Plaid Cymru's vote, they lost 6 seats. So the the nationalism in Wales is not as much a challenge to Labour as it is in Scotland.
Well, May the 5th was an election to your regional parliament. It's a 90 seat body. And, bearing in mind that Northern Ireland, it's a very small population. It's just under 2 million people. I mean, you could put it in the corner of London, to be quite honest with you, population-wise. This election was an historic election, really, in that since partition, that had the population, inbuilt Protestant population, which with it was an inbuilt unionist majority in just about every election. Not so much the councils, but certainly in elections to Parliament, regional bodies, whenever they're set up. For the first time, unionism has lost that majority. For the first time, a nationalist or Republican party or parties have become the majority. Now, in Northern Ireland terms, one would have thought a day like this would have sparked maybe even riots on the streets. You would have thought that maybe a lot of Protestants, hard working class areas, there'd be riots at the interfaces, missiles going over the walls into Catholic areas. And even from a Republican point of view, you would have thought also there would be jubilation on the streets, going through West Belfast, cavalcades, a bit like when they ended the armed struggle. It was just jovial. But none of that, absolutely none of that. It was almost like a very damp squib, to be quite honest with you, in this election. Now, that's not to say for a moment that Sinn Féin becoming the largest party. It was well broadcast before the outcome of this election. The BBC were already moulding Michelle O'Neill, who's the leader and is tipped now to become the first minister, into the position. So it was well warned. The BBC, the media, was effectively, in a way, the future first minister. So I think everybody was expecting exactly what actually happened on the day. If you're somebody outside looking at Northern Ireland, you would probably think, well, this is just a region that's completely split between orange and green. Nothing could be further from the truth. This election, I mean, the turnout slightly down. The turnout was 63.5%, which in fact was a 1% drop from the 2017 election. And in other words, you've got almost 40% of the people that don't even vote, and many of them don't even register to vote. They're completely turned off by all of the parties here. And even for the ones that did register, I mean, you're talking about, I think it was about 825,000 people that actually voted. That doesn't quite add up to 63.5%. I don't know how that works, but that's what you're talking about. And Sinn Féin effectively got about a third of those votes. 29% went to Sinn Féin, and that dropped to 21% of the DUP, the largest unionist party, and there it went down the line, 14% for Alliance Party, which has really jumped from a very low ebb in many years to become the third largest party in Northern Ireland. They're much larger than the Ulster Unionist Party. That's a party of David Trimble, and the SDLP, which is down with only 9% of the overall vote. That's the party of John Hume, the Social Democratic Labour Party, which is the party that the British Labour Party looks to be their sister party here in Northern Ireland, this SDLP. They are a completely sectarian bourgeois party. But with all that in mind, there is no question that Sinn Féin got their vote out, whatever it was going to be. They just about got every candidate they stood here elected, and they managed to pull this vote out. And it was the issue that they were going to become the largest party. And that was very, very much to the demise of the Democratic Unionist Party. Now, the DUP have got themselves into serious trouble since Brexit. They were the party that was the party that many Protestants trusted to keep the region here as part of the UK, but they had more corporate interests. They put corporate interests first, and really, to be honest with you, the link with the UK much to the second. And they were caught out, they were exposed. And Brexit and this border down, or trade border down the Irish Sea, all has come out. And all they've been doing now at the moment is fighting this thing called protocol. You won't hear anybody here talking about it. You go out canvassing and you talk about the issues of the door. I never met one single person at the doorstep who mentioned protocol, none of it. And yet this is this is the issue that they're fighting, to try and get these trade regulations changed and reduced, if not removed, and so on and so forth. In other words, for the DUP to gain some respectability back again, that they're putting the interests here of the people in Northern Ireland, the main interest is going to be the link with the UK, Britain. And it didn't work. It didn't work in the election, didn't work on the doorstep. They took a massive hit. Their vote was down 6.7%. That was a massive hit. And they're sitting, although their seats in the regional assembly is only 2 below Sinn Féin. We have a PR system here, proportional representation, and it's Sinn Féin with 27 seats, with the Democratic Unionist Party 25 seats, 17 for the Alliance, and then all the further down. So Sinn Féin, by effectively 2 more seats, are the largest party, which destines them to nominate the First Minister. The Sinn Féin vote, which although they got all their candidates elected, was actually only went up marginally by effectively 1%. There wasn't any dramatic surge. It was they basically got their vote out on the day, a little bit of an increase, but really not very much of an increase. And that, as I say, was the big issue. The Republican was going to become the largest party, and they were talking a bit throughout the election of a border poll. United Ireland, Mary Lou McDonald, who's the president in the south of Ireland, she expects United Ireland in 5 years, or a border poll in 5 years. They're actually not pushing that issue, because some surveys have suggested that if there was a border poll in the north of Ireland, it would probably be less than about 40% of the people who would actually vote for United Ireland. It's not a big issue, but it's the issue they want to put forward and push. As for any other parties outside, the smaller parties, independents got squeezed badly. The biggest kind of socialist, to be honest with you, they're more of a left Republican party, and that is People Before Profit. They were set up by the Socialist Workers' Party. I used to be a member of them in 2011. In fact, I used to be a candidate for them in 2011. They are quite Stalinist, but they were very, very active on the ground, and they've got a lot of youth around them. Any issue, they're very quick on the ball, and they've been very active for the last 4 years. Their kind of leader is a fellow called Jerry Carroll. And in 2017, Jerry Carroll, People for Profit, this tiny little party, received the second highest vote in Northern Ireland in 2017. The highest vote of all went to Arlene Foster, DUP, who went on to become First Minister. Jerry Carroll of the People Before Profit received the second highest vote in this region. All struggled to get elected this time. He went in on the 5th count. It just collapsed. Now, they base a lot of their support in West Belfast. They've taken a lot of support from Sinn Féin. And in this election, they thought that it was going to be a massive breakthrough. I'm not sure many candidates, but they stood candidates in almost all the constituencies. Jerry just squeezed home. His vote went down by 2/3, and he was the only one returned. In all fairness, there was a big candidate in Derry. He went out on the 11th count, very unlucky not to get elected. But apart from that, 100, 200 votes for the rest of the candidates. No breakthrough. They got really squeezed and crunched. Again, I think probably down to people moving away from this. Let's get Sinn Féin, let's make this historical day, at least in electoral terms. And that really was right across the board. Grassroots issues was the one that you met at the doorstep. and none of these parties have anything to offer on grassroots issues. I mean, absolutely nothing, health or nothing. They keep on harping on about it. I backed a candidate and canvassed for him here in Mid-Ulster. He's a fellow called Pat Hockey. He's an anti-mining candidate. And the big issue that we're faced with in the next coming years is that about a quarter of the region here is going to be opened up for mining, precious metal mining, fossil fuel mining, fracking, and nuclear storage. This is where they're looking at about to completely decimate this country. And this candidate was the one that was trying to get that out, and incidentally received quite a good vote. He got 877 votes, come from nothing on this issue, and that was a good vote he had opened with. We have about 30 canvassers in this constituency alone getting this issue. That's the big issue that no one really knows about, and what's coming down the line. Where we are at the minute, there's all talk. It's in your news at the moment. Is there going to be a Stormont government? Is the British government going to come to the rescue of the DUP? Are we going to set up? If they're prepared, if they don't, because there's a lot of bills coming down. If there's any bills going through Stormont that they don't want here in Stormont, they hand it over to the UK government to implement. The benefits reform bill, for example, that would be a few years ago. We can't touch that. Hand it over to David Cameron at that time. You people have got to implement this for us, because there's going to be massive cuts there. Likewise with the mining, they've got everything in place to introduce the mining legislation. They'll not touch it with a barge pole. It really does sit them down to the ground to hand this over, at least for 6 months, 8 months, to UK government to implement. So they may well just get all these bills through when Stormont is wrangling over this protocol and getting the DUP set up again. I think there will be a government, probably going to be a little while. There'll be a bit of wrangling before that. I think they will get back again, but it's back. Nothing's really changed. We're going to have a Sinn Féin First Minister, DUP Deputy First Minister. Nothing is going to really change, really, except if a few faces there, and an historical election, really, but a very damn squib one, but a bit more of the tribalism that took over.